When I walked out of prison after 3 years, my brother was waiting in my driveway, wearing my watch, living in my house, married to my wife, and smiling like he'd won. That was the moment I realized something. I hadn't just lost 3 years, I had lost my entire life, and the man who took it was my own blood. 3 years earlier, my life was stable. Not perfect, but solid. I had a house my father helped me buy, a small construction business that was finally turning profit, and a wife I thought loved me. A woman I had built plans with, the kind of quiet, domestic, real plans that don't make headlines but make a life. Plans for a bigger yard someday. Plans for children eventually. Plans built on the assumption that the person beside you is actually beside you. My younger brother, Daniel, was always charming, smooth, everyone's favorite. The kind of guy who could borrow money and make you feel guilty for asking it back. When I got arrested, Daniel was the first one to show up. He arrived before I had even been processed. He hugged my wife in the parking lot outside the courthouse, long, steady, reassuring. He spoke with calm authority to people who were panicking. He promised to take care of things. He looked me in the eye through a glass partition and said, in the voice of a man you can depend on, "Don't worry, I've got your back." I believed him. That was my first mistake, and perhaps the most expensive mistake I have ever made. Prison changes you. Not in the dramatic, cinematic way that movies suggest. Not in a single transformative moment of clarity with appropriate lighting and a swelling score. It changes you slowly. It is watching time move without you. Birthdays missed in rooms that look exactly the same as the room you were in yesterday and the room you will be in tomorrow. Holidays that pass as calendar squares rather than experiences. The particular grief of missing ordinary things. A decent meal, a quiet morning, the sound of rain on a window you can choose to open. And the letters. At first my wife wrote every week, then every 2 weeks, then once a month. Then the letters became shorter, then they stopped. Daniel visited twice in 3 years. Both times he sat across from me in that visiting room and delivered the same carefully calibrated reassurances. She's stressed. She's struggling. I'm there every day helping her manage the house, helping her manage my house. I heard those words and I felt gratitude. I felt relief that someone was showing up for her when I couldn't. I felt the particular painful love of a man who is grateful that his brother is filling the space he cannot fill. I did not see the red flags, because I was looking at him through the eyes of trust. Would you question your own blood? The day I was released, nobody came. No wife, no brother. No one holding a sign with my name on it. No car waiting in the lot. Just the sound of the facility gate closing behind me and the strange, overwhelming sensation of open air after 3 years of controlled spaces. I took a bus, and when I turned the corner onto my street, the street I had lived on for 6 years, the street where I knew every neighbor's name and every crack in the sidewalk, I stopped walking. Because something was wrong. My car was in the driveway, but the license plate was different. The garage had been repainted a color I would never have chosen. The porch furniture, the furniture I had bought and assembled and arranged, was gone, replaced by something newer, something that didn't know me. Through the living room window, I saw Daniel, sitting on my couch, in my house, in the life I had left behind 3 years ago, and beside him, my wife, wearing a ring I had never seen before. I stood on that sidewalk for 5 full minutes, not moving, not breathing in any meaningful way, just staring and trying to force what I was seeing into a shape that made sense. Then Daniel walked outside. And the thing that hit me hardest, harder than the ring, harder than the painted garage, harder than any of it, was his expression. He didn't look surprised, he looked prepared. "Hey," he said, in exactly the tone you would use to greet someone returning from a weekend away. Not 3 years in prison, a weekend. I asked him why he was at my house. I kept my voice level. I was proud of that afterward, how level I kept my voice. He didn't answer. Instead, my wife stepped outside. She stood on the porch I had rebuilt with my own hands, and she could not look at me directly, not at my face. She looked somewhere near my shoulder, the way people look when they are carrying guilt too heavy to hold upright, and then Daniel said it. "You don't live here anymore." I laughed. I actually laughed, that involuntary disbelieving sound that comes out of a person when reality has become too absurd to process any other way. Until he held out a folder, I opened it, and the laughter stopped. Divorce papers, finalized 18 months earlier. Property transfer documents showing the house had changed hands. A copy of my father's will, updated according to the header, while I was in my 2nd year of incarceration. My father had passed during my sentence. I had been denied a compassionate release to attend the funeral. I had grieved him in a 6x8 cell with a photograph and a memory, and the particular helplessness of a man who cannot go where his heart needs to go. And while I was doing that, Daniel had become executor of the estate. According to the documents in that folder, the house was now his. The majority of the inheritance was his. My construction business had been liquidated due to what the paperwork described as mismanagement. Liquidated under a power of attorney that bore my signature, my forged signature. That was the moment my chest stopped hurting, because something colder, something cleaner, replaced the pain. Clarity. I spent that night in a motel that cost $32. I had 37 left to my name. I lay on a bed with a mattress that had forgotten what springs were for, and I stared at a water-stained ceiling, and I replayed every family dinner, every birthday, every time I had stepped between Daniel and someone who wanted to hold him accountable, Every time I had said he means well and give him another chance and he's my brother. He didn't just steal my wife, he replaced me. At my father's funeral, the funeral I couldn't attend, he gave the eulogy. He stood at the podium and delivered words about our father while our father's estate was already transferring into his name. In my house, he slept in my bed. In my life, he erased my name. Most people in that motel room would have made a decision fueled entirely by rage, would have driven back to that house, would have done something loud and irreversible and self-destructive. I didn't. I went quiet. And when a man with nothing left to lose goes quiet, that is when he becomes truly dangerous. Here's what Daniel never understood. Prison gave me time, and I had used that time in a way he never anticipated. Law books, estate law, fraud statutes, case precedents, the particular legal architecture of inheritance manipulation and financial forgery. I had read everything I could access because something about my father's situation had never sat right with me, even before I knew the full scope of what had happened. My father did not own a computer. He had never sent an email in his life. He referred to his cell phone as that thing and needed help texting even in his final years. And yet his updated will had been digitally filed 2 weeks before he died, filed by Daniel. I made one phone call from that motel room to my father's original attorney, a man who had handled the family's legal affairs for 20 years and who knew my father's voice, his habits, his wishes. When he heard my name, he went silent. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. Your father never changed his will. I did not confront Daniel. I did not threaten him. I did not appear at my house demanding explanations. I did nothing that would alert him to what was coming. I let him relax. I let him believe, completely comfortably, that he had won, that I was broken, that the man who walked out of that prison with $37 and no home and no family was exactly as diminished as he needed me to be. For 6 months I worked. Bank transfer records from estate accounts, obtained legally through the probate process, forensic analysis of the forged signatures, commissioned through an attorney who specialized in estate fraud, medical records showing my father's condition in his final days, records that documented the level of sedation he was under when the updated will was allegedly signed, security footage from the hospital, email logs traced forensically to Daniel's personal laptop, and then the piece that changed the entire trajectory of what came next. My wife. She had not known. That was the thing Daniel had underestimated, the thing that ultimately unraveled him. She believed, genuinely, that Daniel had legally inherited everything. She believed the story he had constructed because he had constructed it carefully, over years, with the patience of a man who had been planning this for longer than I had known. But she hadn't known the will was forged. I met her, not to argue, not to accuse, not to demand anything, to show her proof. I laid the documents across a table in a coffee shop, and I watched her face as she read them. I watched the confusion become comprehension. I watched comprehension become something that looked like physical pain. Daniel hadn't just betrayed me. He had built their entire life together on a lie. He had looked her in the eyes every morning of their marriage, knowing that the foundation beneath them was fraud. When she understood that, she agreed to testify. And that was when the walls began closing in around him. Daniel still believed he was untouchable, right up until the morning he was served. Fraud, forgery, estate manipulation, financial theft across multiple counts. The kind of charges that do not arrive quietly. They arrive with paperwork and consequences and the particular irrevocable weight of a system that has been shown evidence it cannot ignore. The courtroom was quiet the day of the hearing. Daniel walked in looking confident, dressed carefully, posture arranged into the shape of a man who has been wrongly accused and intends to correct the record. Then the forensic accountant testified. The digital trail was presented, email by email, timestamp by timestamp, IP address by IP address, leading directly and unambiguously to Daniel's laptop on the night the fraudulent will was filed. My father's original attorney took the stand and testified to the contents of the real will. The will my father had actually signed. The will that had never been revoked, never been changed, never been altered by anyone with the authority or the right to do so. In 47 minutes, everything unraveled. The judge did not hesitate. Asset seizure, criminal charges, immediate investigation into additional fraud counts that the evidence had surfaced. And when the officers moved toward him, he looked at me, not with arrogance, not with the smirk from the driveway, not with any of the careful, constructed confidence that had defined every interaction we'd ever had. With fear. He crossed the courtroom. His voice was shaking. And right there, in the same courthouse hallway where he had once stood watching my sentencings with an expression I now understood completely, he dropped to his knees. Please, he said. Don't do this. We're brothers. Brothers. That word from his mouth in that moment meant nothing. I looked at him for a long time, and then I turned around and walked away, because silence hurts more than anything you could say. And I had learned that lesson in a 6x8 cell while he was sleeping in my bed. The house was returned to the rightful estate. His marriage ended within months. She could not reconstruct her life on the foundation of what she now knew it had been built on. The majority of the inheritance was recovered through the civil proceedings that followed the criminal charges. My record was eventually cleared through appeal, a separate, slower process, but one that reached its conclusion. Daniel is still fighting charges. It turns out that living someone else's life is surprisingly easy. Defending it in a courtroom is not. I lost 3 years, but he lost everything. And here is the truth that nobody wants to say out loud. The truth that sits underneath every story like this one. The worst betrayal does not come from enemies. It never does. It comes from the people who were close enough to study you, who knew where you kept your important documents and what your signature looked like and which relationships were the load-bearing walls of your life. It comes from the people who knew exactly how to replace you and who started planning it long before you knew there was anything to plan against. So here is my question for you. If your own brother stole your entire life, every piece of it, methodically over years, while looking you in the eye and telling you he had your back, would you forgive him? Or would you do exactly what I did? Drop your answer in the comments, because I genuinely want to know. And the conversation that happens down there, the honest, human conversation between people who have faced versions of this, is always worth reading. And if someone in your life needs to hear this today, someone who has been replaced, erased, or written out of their own story by someone they trusted, share this with them. Because sometimes people just need to know you can come back from anything, even 3 years, even nothing. If this story moved you, if it made your blood heat or your chest tighten or your gratitude for the genuinely loyal people in your life deepen, like this video, subscribe, turn on notifications. We are here every single week with stories that are raw, real, and unapologetically human. And the next story? Let's just say, this was only the beginning. I will see you there. Don't be late.